Hello, my name is Brianna, and today my group members Cassandra and Alexandra will be presenting on the forced sterilization of women of color. To start off, I will be discussing on the eugenics history in the US, within the US. The eugenics movement was fueled by racism in the 19th and 20th century. The eugenics movement was embraced by scientists, social activists, and politics as a social movement to get rid of undesirable characteristics within the society. Eugenics was a belief that certain practices could improve the biology and genetics of the human race, with white, able bodied people being considered the most fit representation of what was considered good genetics. With that being said, the rapid shift in the US population worried the white American population, which then caused eugenics to be embraced in order to preserve the American way of life. Eugenics led to sterilization of women of color in the US during the 20th century and continued until the 1970s. The Buck versus Bell case granted the ability to sterilize others and confirmed the constitutionality of Virginia's statute of forced sterilization. Indiana became the first state to allow eugenic surgery, where doctors performed procedures on inmates within a Indiana prison. Soon other states began to follow this movement. Forced sterilization, women of color prisons. According to the documentary Belly of the Beast, there had been nearly 1,400 sterilizations between the years 1997 and 2013 at Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Majority of the women who had been sterilized were Black and Latina prisoners. Records have found that there had been records of payments made to doctors that were contracted by the prison. The state of California used funds to pay doctors almost $150,000, even though the California law prohibits federal funds to be used for sterilization. Back in 2017, General Sessions Judge Sam Burningfield from Tennessee was exposed for making an offer to an inmate in White County, Tennessee, which she offered that she would allow them to. She offered that if the inmate could volunteer for sterilization procedures, but in return for that, she would receive a shorter prison sentence. During the 2-month period, the order was placed, it was reported that 32 women received implants of Nexpolin and 38 signed up to receive what was called vasectomies or something like that. I can't really know how to pronounce it. Anyways, in 2019, Judge Burningfield ended the order and a Tennessee law was passed that which banned these deals from being made to inmates. In a 2014 study, it was found that 34% of the tubal ligations were conducted on female prisoners with less than a 7th grade reading level, and 50% were conducted on those with less than a 9th grade reading level. In this same study, it was found that 24% of the 144 tubal ligations were performed on Black and women, and 47% of the procedures were conducted on Hispanic or Mexican prisoners. In 2020, more than 40 women submitted testimonies alleging that they were medically abused by a gynecologist while being in custody of ICE in Georgia. The women went under unnecessary. They discussed how the women were under unnecessary medical procedures such as hysterectomies, and when speaking out, some women were deported as punishment for speaking out on what was done to them.
Hello, I'm Cassandra, and I'm going to continue the presentation by talking about the Tuskegee study. The Tuskegee study. In 1932, the Public Health Service, working with the Tuskegee Institute, worked on a study called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis. The purpose of the study was to record the progression of syphilis in the American Black populations. The study involved 600 American Black men, 399 with syphilis, and 201 that did not have the disease. The project was projected to last 6 months but went on for 40 years. In 1972, it was discovered by the Associated Press and an ad hoc advisory panel that the patients had been misled about the real purpose of the study before agreeing and were getting no treatment at all. Researchers were misinforming victims about the research and were informing the patients that they were being treated for bad blood, which is a local term that was used to describe several diseases, including syphilis, anemia, and fatigue. Patients were not receiving proper treatment even when penicillin began to be widely used as treatment for syphilis. And in October 1972, the panel advised stopping the study at once, and a month later, the Assistant Secretary for Health and Scientific Affairs announced the end of the Tuskegee study. The Trump administration and the Tuskegee study. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People on behalf of the study participants and their families. As part of the settlement, participants were promised lifetime medical benefits and burial services from the U.S. government and provided by the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program. In 2017, the Trump administration opposed using unclaimed money from the legal settlement to fund a museum honoring victims of the study. In a statement, the government said that it does not intend in any way to justify, condone, or defend the Tuskegee syphilis study, but allowing remaining money from the $9 million settlement to fund the museum would violate the settlement's original provision that any leftover money goes back to the government. Madrigal versus Quilligan. In the early 1970s, Dr. Bernard Buddy Rosenfeld, a doctor working at USC Medical Center, exposed the widespread sterilization abuse on the maternity ward. Rosenfeld believed the victims were women of Mexican origin and he had estimated 20 to 30% of doctors had forced sterilization on patients while misinforming them on the procedure. Rosenfeld's whistleblowing led to the Madrigal versus Quilligan case. Madrigal versus Quilligan was a civil rights class action lawsuit against Los Angeles County USC Medical Center for involuntary and forced sterilization, which was filed by 10 Mexican American women. The Madrigal 10 alleged that doctors at the medical center sterilized each of them between 1971 and 1974. The women were forced into signing English language consent forms while their primary language was Spanish and / were misinformed about the procedure that would take place. The case was taken to U.S. District Judge Jesse W. Curtis, where each woman testified before Judge Curtis. So what was the issue of the case? The issue was a procedure of sterilization conducted by doctors without consent, a violation of civil and constitutional rights of the victims. The rule is that civil and constitutional rights protect the rights to bear children. So how does the issue and rule apply to the case? Well, the doctors had not informed or had misinformed patients that their tubes would be tied. The women alleged they were forced to sign papers that did not inform them on the procedure and gave the rights to the doctors to perform the operations under stressful circumstances or under false impression, and often had the procedure after childbirth. Among the victims was Dolores Madrigal, who claimed that doctors pressured her into signing a sterilization consent form while she was in labor and was told she would die if she had another child. Madrigal had believed the procedure was reversible, but later found that it wasn't. Another victim, Maria Hurtado, went to the medical center for a routine checkup, which turned into an emergency C-section delivery. Hurtado was given a consent form without knowing there were forms for the sterilization procedure. She signed the form without any explanation from the doctor and underwent the surgery following the delivery of her child. The judge, Jesse Curtis, sided with the county hospital due to the idea that their doctors had the interests of the patients in mind when deciding to conduct these procedures. Therefore, the doctors did not do anything wrong. Judge Curtis explained that the procedure was not unacceptable if the doctor believed that the procedure could help improve the issue of overpopulation. He also stated that there was miscommunication between the patients and doctors, and he could not charge doctors of sterilization without consent since the women themselves signed the consent forms. The judge ruled against the plaintiffs, concluding that the case was 10 distinct random occurrences and the woman's rights to bear children were not violated. The Madrigal 10 lost the case. Although the judge ruled in favor of the defendants, the court case resulted in progress against sterilization abuse, such as bilingual sterilization consent forms and a 72-hour waiting period between consent and operation. However, the women of the case were not compensated for damages. Ethical standards of research. In the past, doctors conducting the sterilization process did not follow ethical approaches towards patients as they did not allow women to consider whether they wanted to use sterilization as a method of contraception. The following ethical standards have been recommended by the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Respect for a woman's reproductive system should be the primary concern guiding sterilization provision policy. Gynecologists should provide pre-sterilization counseling that includes a discussion of a woman's reproductive desires and prioritizes her wishes. Gynecologists should avoid taking sterilization actions based on biases about race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and motherhood. Incarcerated women should only undergo sterilization after access to long-acting reversible contraception methods have been made available to them and documented proof of request for sterilization prior to incarceration is available. When doctors do not follow ethical procedures, it can lead to ethical issues towards sterilization patients, such as women not understanding the process of sterilization, and physicians will recommend sterilization to a patient based on their race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, such as in the case of Madrigal versus Quim.
Hi, I'm Alexandra, and this is our conclusion. In conclusion, sterilization not only happened to women, but also to men in 1909. This movement was embraced by the social activists, scientists, and politics. Excuse me. It was going on for 70 years. These women didn't have the chance to decide whether they wanted it or not. There was no money given to these women, but the testimony of the nurses would back up the doctors. The doctors would take the females' testimony. This occurred to females who were people of color, poor, and mentally ill, and criminals, because according to them, they'll be having kids that are dangerous to society. They believed that with sterilization, they would be able to improve the biology and genetics of the human race. From 2006 to 2010, they authorized sterilization in California prisons to about 150 female inmates. Women of color were getting sterilized in prisons. For example, Latinas and Black women. The doctors were getting paid a huge amount of money to make tubal ligations happen. I'm sorry. Doctors were getting paid with funds, even though California laws didn't allow them to get paid for sterilizations and funds. Women were signed the consent form without them even realizing the situation they were getting themselves into because they didn't know how to speak English. For example, the Latinas, they didn't know English, so how were they gonna know what it said? And they were pressured to actually sign the paper by the doctors as we stayed through the video. Throughout history, sterilization occurred the most in asylums, hospitals, but they weren't documented because of the aspect of their history. Until now, they still don't provide us a website where it states that sterilization occurred back in the day and how it happened. The American College of Obstetricians, I think that's what you say, I'm sorry, and gynecologists recommended a couple of ethical standards that the doctors could have used when sterilization was occurring. Many women did testimonies where they claimed that they were being abused by gynecologists and they were going through unnecessary procedures. About 20% through 30% of the doctors put sterilization on the women who didn't understand this procedure and were misguided with it. Women were forced to sign papers that were the opposite of their language. We spoke about a case that was taken to court and where women testified. But the outcome was already known since these women did sign the consent form, and the even though the judge was on their side, they couldn't do much because they had signed the consent form. Thank you.